On the outer rim of the galaxy, far from the safety of peaceful planets, there was a world under siege. Xuria, a quiet and beautiful planet, had always been a beacon of hope for many civilizations. The Xurians, a peaceful and highly intelligent species, had spent centuries building alliances and sharing their knowledge with other worlds. But now, they were facing a nightmare. The invaders came without warning, descending on Xuria with overwhelming force. Their fleet, vast and deadly, filled the skies with dark ships that blocked out the sun. The Xurians had never faced a threat like this before. Their peaceful ways left them ill-prepared for battle. They tried to fight back, but their weapons were no match for the invaders' advanced technology. As the first blasts hit the planet's surface, panic spread across the land. The Xurians' once thriving cities were reduced to rubble in mere hours. Their leaders, desperate and powerless, realized that their time was running out. If they didn't do something soon, their entire civilization would be wiped from the galaxy. But what could they do? Who could they turn to? With their hope dwindling, the Xurians made a choice. They had one last option, a risky move that might be their only chance. They sent out a distress signal, not to their allies, not to their friends, but to the Deathworlders, a species so fierce, so terrifying, that even the most dangerous predators in the galaxy feared them. The Deathworlders were humanity's warriors, brutal and relentless, living on a world where survival meant constant battle. The signal was simple, but desperate. We need help. We are in danger. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us. The message echoed through space, hoping that someone would answer. The Xurians' fate now rested in the hands of those who had nothing to lose. As the message was sent, the Xurians waited in fear. Would the Deathworlders even care? Or would they ignore the call, leaving Xuria to burn? They had no way of knowing. The Deathworlders were a mystery to the Xurians, mysterious, savage, and brutal. Would they be willing to risk their lives to save a peaceful species they didn't even know? Across the galaxy, on the rugged, unforgiving planet known as Earth, the message reached its destination. The Deathworlders had a reputation that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened warriors. They lived in a world where only the strongest survived, where danger was a constant companion. But they weren't just survivors. They were hunters, protectors, and warriors who fought for something more than just survival. Captain Jarek of the Deathworlder fleet stood on the bridge of his warship when the message came in. His eyes narrowed as he listened to the plea from Xuria. He had heard of their peaceful ways, their knowledge, and their alliances with other species. But he also knew that the Deathworlders weren't known for helping others unless it was in their interest. He paused, staring at the message. A quiet hum filled the bridge as the crew waited for his orders. His heart pounded in his chest. It wasn't that Jarek didn't care. He had fought many battles, led countless raids, and seen his comrades fall. He had his reasons for being cautious. The Deathworlders were warriors, yes, but they were also solitary creatures. They didn't take kindly to being dragged into someone else's war. Yet, as Jarek thought about it, something in the message struck him. Help us. Those words were different. They weren't a plea for control, resources, or domination. They were words of desperation, and it was that desperation that made the call impossible to ignore. Jarek turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Kayla. She had served by his side for years, and she knew him well. "What do you think?" he asked her quietly. Kayla didn't hesitate. "We don't leave anyone behind, Captain. If we don't answer the call, then who will?" Jarek glanced back at the message, his fingers tightening around the edge of the console. His mind raced. He had always been a warrior who fought for his own survival, but this was different. A world, an entire species, was at risk. A world that had sent out a cry for help. Could he ignore that? Could he let the Xurians fall to the invaders? "No," Jarek said firmly, turning toward his crew. "We go. We answer the call." The room went quiet as the crew processed the decision. Some looked at each other in surprise, This was unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever done before. They were used to being feared, to being the ones on the attack. But now, they would be the ones answering someone else's cry for help. It was a risk, a dangerous one. But Jarek had made his decision. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice filled with resolve. "We lead for Xeria immediately." As the Deathworlder fleet powered up and set course for the distant planet, the Xerians waited anxiously. They had sent their message, but would anyone answer? Would the Deathworlders come to their aid, or would they be left to face their doom alone? The answer was already on its way. The stars outside the bridge of the Deathworlder fleet flickered like distant fires. Captain Jarek stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. The message from the Xerians was still fresh in his mind, the plea for help. The desperation in their voices. It echoed in his thoughts, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" Lieutenant Kayla's voice broke the silence. She stood beside him, her arms folded, her eyes searching the stars as if trying to read the future. "We've never done anything like this before." Jarek didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, weighing the decision. The Deathworlders were known for their strength, for their ability to conquer and survive, but they were not a race of heroes. They were warriors, not saviors. But there was something different about this situation. The Xerians weren't asking for conquest or revenge. They were asking for a simple thing: survival. They needed help, and the Deathworlders, they were the last hope. "They need us, Kayla," Jarek finally said, his voice steady. "We can't ignore that." Kayla nodded slowly. She understood. She had fought alongside Jarek for years. She had seen him lead his warriors into battle without hesitation. But this was new. The Xerians weren't warriors, and they weren't asking for a fight. They were asking for protection. As Jarek gave the order to move forward, the rest of the crew worked quickly to prepare the fleet for the journey to Xeria. The Deathworlders were not accustomed to traveling across peaceful space. They were used to traveling through hostile territory, with enemies in every direction. The idea of entering a peaceful system, with no clear enemy, felt strange. But they had a mission now. The Deathworlders, known for their brutal tactics and unrelenting strength, were about to become something more: protectors. The fleet moved in silence, its massive ships gliding through the stars toward Xeria. The crew was tense, each person silently wondering if they were making the right choice. No one spoke much. They all knew the risks. If they failed, the Xerians would fall, and the Deathworlders would be seen as weak, their reputation shattered. If they succeeded, they would become something more than just warriors. They would be heroes. But that was a big if. The closer they got to Xeria, the more the weight of the decision pressed on Jarek's shoulders. He knew the dangers of the galaxy, knew what kind of threats were out there. And he knew that the Xerians weren't the only ones watching their move. The invaders who had attacked Xeria were ruthless, organized, and had one goal: to wipe out everything in their path. "We'll have to move fast," Kayla said, breaking into Jarek's thoughts once more. "The invaders won't give us time to waste." Jarek nodded. "I know. We'll hit them hard and fast." The Deathworlders had a reputation for their deadly speed and their ability to adapt to any situation. They were known for their aggressive tactics: strike first, strike hard, and leave no room for the enemy to recover. It was the way they had survived on their harsh, dangerous homeworld, and it was the way they would fight to protect the Xerians. As the fleet neared Xeria, Jarek gave one last command: "Prepare for combat. We'll hit them where it hurts." The crew responded with practiced precision. Weapons were loaded, shields were activated, and fighters were readied. The entire fleet was a well-oiled machine, moving with the deadly efficiency that only the Deathworlders could muster. From the bridge, Jarek watched the planet grow larger in the viewport. It was beautiful, a blue-green world with oceans and forests, a world that didn't deserve to be destroyed, a world that didn't deserve to fall into the hands of invaders. He could almost feel the weight of the Xyrian's hope pressing down on him. "Captain." Cadilla's voice interrupted his thoughts. She pointed toward the planet's surface. "We've detected enemy ships. They're already landing forces." Jarek's expression hardened. The invaders had made it to the surface faster than expected. They were wasting no time. "We can't let them take the planet," Jarek said. His voice was cold, filled with the resolve of a warrior who knew exactly what needed to be done. He turned to his crew. "All hands, prepare for battle. It's time to show the galaxy what the Deathworlders are made of." The fleet moved into position, ready to strike. They knew this would be no easy fight, but the Deathworlders didn't shy away from challenges. They were born for moments like this. Their enemies may have been ruthless, but the Deathworlders were unrelenting. They would not back down. As Jarek stood at the front of the bridge, staring down at Syria below, he made one final promise to himself. They would win, or they would die trying. The Deathworlders were coming. The darkness of space was alive with movement. The Deathworlder fleet, once a quiet force of destruction, now cut through the stars with a sense of purpose. Their ships, massive and relentless, formed a wall of steel and fire as they neared the peaceful planet of Syria. On the bridge, Captain Jarek stood with his hands firmly gripping the console. His gaze was focused, his mind sharp. The crew around him moved quickly, their faces set in determination. They knew what was coming, and they knew the stakes. "Enemy ships are on the surface," Kayla reported from her station. "We've detected landing pods. The invaders are already deploying troops." Jarek's jaw tightened. The invaders hadn't wasted a moment. They had landed with force, likely aiming to take control of Syria's major cities. It was clear they had no intention of negotiating or showing mercy. "We won't give them the chance to dig in," Jarek said, turning toward his officers. "All ships, prepare to strike. We hit them hard, hit them fast, and make sure they don't get a chance to regroup." The Deathworlders had fought many wars, but this was different. The battle wasn't just about survival or conquest. It was about protecting a species that had never known true warfare. The Xyrians were peaceful, and though they had tried to fight back, their weapons were no match for the invaders. But the Deathworlders, they were warriors. And now, they were the galaxy's last hope. Jarek watched as the first wave of fighter ships launched from the fleet's hangars. They zipped out into space with the speed of predators, their engines roaring as they went into battle. The Deathworlders didn't need to say much to communicate. Their actions spoke louder than words. The fighters split into formations, flying in perfect synchrony as they made their way toward the planet below. Meanwhile, the Deathworlder warships began their descent, charging their weapons for the final blow. Their massive cannons, capable of destroying entire fleets with a single shot, were now locked onto their targets, the invaders' landing ships. "Target their command center," Jarek ordered. "We take out the heart, and the rest will fall." The fleet responded in unison, unleashing a barrage of powerful energy blasts at the invaders. Explosions erupted across the sky as the first of the invader ships were destroyed. The Deathworlders' strength and precision were unmatched, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. On the ground, the Xyrians had been hiding in their underground bunkers, too frightened to make a move. But when they saw the Deathworlders' ships firing upon the invaders, their hope began to return. The invaders had thought Syria would fall easily, but they hadn't anticipated the fury of the Deathworlders. The invaders were quick to react, firing back at the fleet, but they were disorganized. Their ships scattered in an attempt to evade the incoming blasts. Their defense wasn't enough to stop the Deathworlder fleet. The invaders had come to conquer, but they had no idea what they were up against. Jarek watched the destruction unfold. The invaders were strong, but they were not prepared for the Deathworlders' brutal tactics. Every move the Deathworlders made was calculated, precise, and merciless. They struck with the fury of 1,000 storms. The invaders tried to retaliate, launching their own missiles and energy beams, but the Deathworlder ships were too quick, too powerful. Each strike that hit an invader ship was another step closer to victory. "We're pushing them back," Kayla shouted. Her voice was filled with excitement, but also a sense of disbelief. This was happening. The Deathworlders were winning. Jarek's lips curled into a small, grim smile. He wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. The battle had only just begun. On the surface of Syria, the battle was far from over. The invaders had made it to the main city, and their ground forces were moving quickly. They were ruthless, stomping through the streets, destroying everything in their path. Jarek knew that the Deathworlders couldn't just win in space. They had to go to the surface, to the heart of the enemy's invasion. If the Tyrians were to have any hope of survival, the Deathworlders had to take the battle to the ground. "Prepare for planetary assault," Jarek commanded, his voice calm but firm. "We're going in." The fleet's fighters, now taking down more invader ships, began their descent toward the surface. But the battle wouldn't be won in the sky alone. The Deathworlders had come to fight on the ground, where the real war was taking place. As the Deathworlders landed on the planet, their soldiers disembarked. They were clad in the armor of legends, their weapons glowing with energy as they marched toward the invaders. The sound of boots hitting the ground was like a thunderclap, a warning to the enemy that the true battle was about to begin. Jarek and Kayla led the charge, their warriors following close behind. They had trained for this their entire lives. The Deathworlders were known for their merciless nature, but today they weren't fighting for themselves. They were fighting for Syria and for the future of a peaceful world. The first clash came quickly. The invaders, not expecting such a fierce response, were caught off guard. The Deathworlders, with their brutal efficiency and ruthless tactics, overwhelmed the invaders. The ground shook with each explosion, and the sky lit up with the flashes of battle. Jarek stood at the front, his blade raised high, leading his warriors into the heart of the enemy's lines. The Deathworlders fought with a single-minded determination, pushing back the invaders, step by step. Each victory was hard-fought, but each was a message to the galaxy. When the Deathworlders rise, nothing can stop them. But the fight was far from over. The invaders may have been pushed back, but they were not defeated. They had underestimated the Deathworlders, and now they would learn the true cost of that mistake. The battle on the ground had reached a fever pitch. Explosions rocked the streets of Syria's capital city as the Deathworlders fought with relentless precision. Their war cries echoed through the chaos, their weapons cutting down the invaders in waves. The invaders, once confident in their numbers, were now struggling to hold their ground. Captain Jarek stood at the front of the charge, his blade a blur of motion as it cleaved through the enemy forces. His warriors followed, each one moving like a force of nature, carving through the invaders' ranks. The ground was littered with debris and the smoldering wreckage of fallen invader machines. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of battle. But as the Deathworlders pushed forward, it became clear that the invaders were not retreating. Instead, they were regrouping. The invader commander, a towering figure known only as Kragner, had sent his elite forces to reinforce their position. These soldiers were unlike anything the Deathworlders had encountered before. They were fast, coordinated, and they fought with a ferocity that matched their own. "Captain, we've got trouble." Kayla's voice came through Jarek's comlink, sharp and urgent. "Kragner's forces are setting up an ambush." They'd got heavy artillery ahead. Jarek's eyes narrowed. This wasn't good. The invaders were adapting faster than they had expected. Kragner had clearly learned from their tactics and was now preparing to counter them. If they weren't careful, the tide of the battle could easily turn. "Pull back, but keep them in sight," Jarek ordered. "We'll need to outmaneuver them." He signaled to his warriors, and they immediately fell into a defensive formation, retreating just enough to lure the invaders into a trap. The Deathworlders were known for their ability to turn the tables in the heat of battle, and now was their moment. On the other side of the battlefield, the invaders' heavy artillery units began to fire, their weapons creating massive shockwaves as they blasted through the city's walls. Buildings crumbled as the invaders made their final push to reclaim the upper hand. But the Deathworlders had anticipated this. Jarek's fleet had been silently circling above, waiting for the perfect opportunity. As the invaders' artillery fire intensified, Jarek gave the signal. The Deathworlder warships above the city dropped their payloads, precise laser strikes that decimated the invaders' artillery positions. The invaders' firepower faltered, their forces scrambling to reposition. "Now," Jarek shouted. The Deathworlders took the moment of confusion to strike back. They surged forward, pushing through the remaining invaders, cutting them down with brutal efficiency. The elite invader soldiers that Kragner had sent for reinforcement were caught off guard, their formations breaking as the Deathworlders closed in. But Kragner wasn't finished. The invader commander had one last card to play. From the shadows of the city, a massive war machine emerged, towering, menacing, and armed with weapons capable of leveling entire blocks. It was a terrifying sight, its metallic body gleaming with death. "This ends now," Kayla muttered under her breath, eyes locking onto the mechanical behemoth. Jarek's heart raced. He had expected a counterattack, but not like this. The invaders were desperate, and Kragner was pulling out all the stops. The war machine unleashed a wave of firepower, tearing through Deathworlder lines. The ground shook with each blast, and the air crackled with the intensity of the assault. The Deathworlders were pushed back momentarily, their ranks scattered by the force of the explosion. But the Deathworlders had one advantage the invaders didn't: their ability to adapt on the fly. "Move. Spread out," Jarek commanded. "We'll use their momentum against them." The Deathworlders quickly reorganized, splitting into smaller, faster groups. They dodged the war machine's deadly blasts, using the ruins of the city as cover. The Deathworlders weren't just fighters, they were survivors, and survival was the key to victory. Kayla and Jarek led a small squad toward the war machine, dodging incoming fire as they advanced. The machine was slow, its movements heavy and cumbersome, but it packed a punch. The Deathworlders knew they couldn't take it head-on, but they could outmaneuver it. "Focus on its weak points," Jarek ordered. "The joints, the power core. We take it down piece by piece." Kayla nodded, her face grim. She knew the stakes. If they didn't disable that war machine, the Deathworlders would be at a severe disadvantage. The small squad of Deathworlders reached the war machine's flank. They took cover behind a building as the machine unleashed another barrage of fire. Jarek and Kayla, alongside their best warriors, moved quickly to the side of the machine. They knew they didn't have much time. If the invaders could get their reinforcements in position, they would be finished. "Now," Jarek shouted, and the squad moved in. The Deathworlders attacked the machine's joints, using high-powered explosives to weaken its structure. The war machine roared in defiance, but the Deathworlders' attack was relentless. They moved with precision, disabling its weapons and stripping away its armor. The invaders inside the machine scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. With one final, decisive explosion, the war machine fell. It crashed to the ground with a thunderous roar, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Deathworlders had won this round. "Target neutralized," Kayla said, her voice filled with triumph. Jarek let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle wasn't over, but this was a turning point. The invaders had underestimated the Deathworlders, and now they were paying the price. "We've got them on the run," Jarek said, his voice firm. "Press the attack. Finish this." The Deathworlders pushed forward with renewed strength, knowing that the tide of battle had shifted. The invaders, shaken by the fall of their war machine, began to retreat. They had no idea what they were up against, and now the Deathworlders were about to show them. The victory was far from complete, but for the first time, it seemed possible. The Deathworlders had proven their strength, their resilience, and their unwavering resolve. And the galaxy would never forget it. The Deathworlders were relentless. Their spirits were unyielding, and their rage was now a weapon, honed by the brutal challenges of their homeworld. Jarek could feel the surge of power in his veins as he led his warriors forward, each step bringing them closer to victory. But he knew, as did his comrades, that the invaders had one last trick up their sleeves. It wasn't over yet. The invaders' retreat had been short-lived. Kragner, their cunning commander, had already regrouped his forces. Now, they stood on the edge of a barren field just outside the city, their final line of defense prepared for a brutal confrontation. The Deathworlders had pushed them to the brink, but Kragner was not a fool. He had seen what they were capable of, and now he was desperate. In the distance, Jarek could see the ominous silhouette of a massive structure rising from the ground. It was an ancient fortress, constructed with alien technology, and it was heavily fortified. Inside, Kragner had something the Deathworlders had not anticipated: an army of genetically enhanced soldiers, bred for one purpose: destruction. "Captain, it's a trap." Kayla's voice crackled over the comlink, sharp with urgency. "They're preparing for a last stand, and they got reinforcements coming." Jarek's heart raced. He knew they couldn't afford to let the invaders regroup any longer. This was it, the final battle. The Deathworlders would either crush their enemies once and for all or be buried beneath the weight of the invaders' final counterattack. "Hold position," Jarek ordered. "We move in as one. We break their line before they can reinforce." As the Deathworlders moved forward, the landscape ahead was marked by smoke and the remnants of broken war machines. The battle had taken a heavy toll on both sides. But Jarek could feel something stirring in the air, a strange energy he had never experienced before. "Captain, we've got something incoming," Kayla warned. "Something huge." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. A massive warship appeared in the sky, its engines roaring like a beast ready to strike. The invaders had called for reinforcements from their mothership, and now it was descending rapidly, its weapon systems coming online. Jarek's eyes narrowed. This was their final play, their desperation made manifest. The invaders were not just trying to hold ground. They were about to unleash everything they had left. "Prepare yourselves," Jarek bellowed. "This is where we win or die." The Deathworlders scattered, finding cover behind the crumbling remains of buildings and other debris. The sky above them darkened as the invader warship descended closer, a shadow cast over the entire battlefield. Its massive cannons fired, sending shockwaves through the air as they tore into the landscape, creating craters and obliterating everything in their path. Jarek moved swiftly, guiding his warriors with the precision of a seasoned leader. Their movements were coordinated, each one working like a well-oiled machine. They darted between cover, dodging the warship's attacks, pushing forward with the relentless speed that only Deathworlders possessed. But even as the warship's fire rained down on them, the Deathworlders pressed on. They had no fear. Fear was a concept foreign to them. What they had instead was resolve. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would do so again. "Kayla, now," Jarek shouted. Kayla nodded, her face set with determination. She activated a series of explosives hidden within the wreckage around them. The carefully placed charges detonated in a synchronized explosion, causing a massive collapse in the enemy's defensive line. The shockwave sent invaders flying, their armor useless against the force of the blast. But it was only the beginning. From the shadows of the battlefield, a small group of Deathworlder engineers emerged, armed with advanced weapons designed to breach even the toughest fortifications. They moved swiftly toward the base of the invader fortress, ready to plant their final charges. "Push forward," Jarek commanded. "Take that fortress, and we'll end this." The Deathworlders surged forward, now with the momentum of a freight train. Their enemies, already reeling from the explosions, were struggling to mount any kind of defense. The invader elite soldiers tried to regroup, but their efforts were in vain. The Deathworlders were everywhere, moving with terrifying speed and efficiency, overwhelming the invaders at every turn. As they reached the base of the fortress, The Deathworlders planted the last of their explosives, preparing for the final strike. The ground shook as the charges were set, and Jarek could feel the anticipation in the air. This was it. The invaders' last hope was about to be shattered. "Get clear," Kayla shouted as the countdown began. Jarek turned and sprinted, knowing that the explosion would be massive. The Deathworlders had already won the battle, but the fall of the fortress would mark the end of the invaders' war. The countdown reached its final seconds, and the Deathworlders barely had time to take cover as the ground beneath them erupted. A blinding flash filled the sky, followed by the deafening roar of the explosion. The fortress collapsed in on itself, a massive cloud of dust and debris rising into the air. When the dust finally settled, the invaders were no more. Jarek stood among his warriors, panting heavily. The battle was over, and the Deathworlders had emerged victorious. The invaders were defeated, their forces scattered and broken. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment when humanity's Deathworlders answered the call and saved the helpless aliens from certain destruction. The Deathworlders had proven their strength once again. The galaxy was theirs for the taking. But Jarek knew this wasn't the end. The Deathworlders had made powerful enemies, and they would always be a target. But for now, they had won. And they would celebrate their victory. The smoke from the ruined fortress hung heavy in the air. The once pristine sky now looked like a canvas stained by the violence of battle. For the Deathworlders, the aftermath of the war was a mixture of victory and solemn reflection. They had won, but the cost had been high. Lives had been lost, cities had been reduced to rubble, and the echoes of war would linger in the galaxy for years to come. Jarek stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the cleanup efforts unfold. His armor was battered and scorched, but his eyes were clear. He had led his warriors to victory, and now it was time to rebuild. But even as the engineers and medics worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded and repair the damage, Jarek couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. "Captain," Kayla's voice came from behind him, breaking his thoughts. "We've secured the area. The invaders' fleet is retreating. But there are signs of something else. Their mothership's gone dark." Jarek turned to face her, his brow furrowing. "Gone dark? What does that mean?" "I'm not sure yet," Kayla said, her tone grave. "But the communications from the mothership have stopped completely. We can't track them, and the rest of their fleet is heading into deep space. It's like they've disappeared." Jarek's instincts told him this wasn't over. The invaders may have been defeated, but their mothership, an enormous, heavily armed vessel, had played a key role in the invasion. If it was gone, then something far bigger was brewing in the shadows. "Keep an eye on it," Jarek said. "We'll need to be prepared for whatever comes next." As Kayla moved off to relay the orders, Jarek's thoughts drifted back to the many species they had fought to protect. The galaxy had long been a place of strife, with countless races fighting for dominance. The Deathworlders had answered the call to defend the weak and helpless, but now, in the aftermath of their victory, Jarek couldn't help but wonder, what would happen to the galaxy once they left? The aliens they had saved were grateful, of course. Many were already rebuilding their shattered worlds, trying to recover from the devastation. But Jarek knew that peace was fragile, and while the Deathworlders had been instrumental in the battle, they had no interest in ruling the galaxy. They were warriors, not conquerors. They had come to fight for others, not to claim power for themselves. "Jarek, we need to talk." Kayla's voice interrupted his thoughts once again. He turned to face her, noting the concerned expression on her face. Something was wrong. "What is it?" "It's the council," Kayla said, her voice lowering. "They've called for a meeting. They want to discuss the Deathworlders." Jarek's chest tightened. The Galactic Council had always viewed the Deathworlders with suspicion. They were seen as a necessary evil, powerful but dangerous, a force that could not be controlled. And now, with the invaders defeated, the Council wanted to talk. "Do they think we'll just leave?" Jarek asked, his voice edged with frustration. Kayla shook her head. No, it's more than that. They want us to stay, as their protectors. Jarek's hands clenched into fists. He had fought for the aliens, yes, but not to become their permanent guardians. The Deathworlders were not a force to be used. They were free, independent, and should never be shackled to another's will. We won't be anyone's pawns, Jarek said firmly. Tell them that we're not here to rule or protect them forever. We fight when needed. But after that, we return to our worlds. Kayla nodded, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. She understood Jarek's position, but even she couldn't ignore the fact that the galaxy had just witnessed the Deathworlders' immense power. The Council could try to convince them to stay, but they might also find ways to manipulate them into action. The two warriors stood in silence, watching as the last remnants of the invader forces were swept away. The victory was theirs, but the war for the future was just beginning. Jarek didn't know what would come next, but he was certain of one thing. The Deathworlders would not be controlled. Their actions, their decisions would always be their own. The aftermath of battle was never easy. The scars left behind would take time to heal, both on the worlds that had been ravaged and within the hearts of those who had fought. The Deathworlders had proven their worth, but they had no interest in playing the role of eternal saviors. Let them come, Jarek murmured to himself, his gaze steady as he looked out over the battlefield. We'll answer the call, but when it's over, we leave. The days following the victory were quiet. The hum of war had subsided, and the Deathworlders found themselves in a rare moment of peace. Yet that peace was fleeting. Jarek knew that the calm before the storm could not last forever. The Galactic Council had made their intentions clear. They wanted the Deathworlders to remain as their protectors, to stay in the heart of galactic politics, to answer the endless calls for help. But Jarek had never signed up for that. He stood once again at the edge of the battlefield, now littered with the remnants of the invaders' defeat. It was an eerie calm, one that made him uneasy. He turned to Kayla, who was standing beside him, scanning the horizon. The heavy silence between them spoke volumes. They think we're going to stay, Kayla said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of the truth. But I don't think they understand us. Not fully. Jarek nodded, his eyes fixed on the far-off lights of the Galactic Council ships that hovered in orbit above the planet. He knew what they wanted, but it was never going to be that simple. The Deathworlders were warriors. They fought for freedom, for the honor of their people, not to be chained by galactic politics. They miscalculated, Jarek muttered. We fight when we must, but we leave when the battle is over. That's our way. As if on cue, the holographic display in front of them flickered to life, showing a new transmission. It was from the Galactic Council. The time had come to speak. Jarek clenched his fists and activated the comlink, his voice steady as he addressed the council. This is Captain Jarek of the Deathworlder forces, he said, his tone unwavering. You wanted to speak to us. Now we're listening. A hologram of the council's leader, a tall, dignified figure, appeared before them. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes, a mixture of authority and hidden calculation. Captain Jarek, we commend your people for their bravery, the council leader began. But the galaxy is in a fragile state. Your forces are unmatched, and we need that strength to maintain order. We ask that you remain in our service, as our protectors. The galaxy needs you. Jarek's eyes narrowed. He had heard this plea before, but now it felt more like an ultimatum than a request. You ask for our loyalty, Jarek said, his voice firm. But that loyalty can't be bought. We fight because we choose to, not because you command us. Our war is not your war, and your peace is not our peace. We will not stay in your service. When the battle ends, so do we. We will return to our homes, to our people. And if the galaxy needs our help again, we will answer the call, but only on our terms. The council leader's face darkened. He had expected resistance, but not so direct a refusal. "You misunderstand, Captain," the council leader said, his tone sharp. "We are offering you a place at the heart of the galaxy, a chance to lead, to shape the future. This isn't just about peace, it's about power. The power to influence the course of history." Jarek's expression hardened. "We don't seek power, we seek freedom. The Deathworlders are not here to rule. We are not your soldiers, and we will not be anyone's pawns." There was a long silence. Kayla glanced at Jarek, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and pride. She knew this was the defining moment, the one that would shape their future. The council leader seemed to consider Jarek's words carefully before speaking again. "We will not force you to stay, Captain," he said slowly, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. "But know this, the galaxy is changing. New enemies are rising, and if you walk away, you may find yourselves alone, facing threats you cannot even imagine." Jarek's gaze remained steady. "We will face what comes, as we always have. Alone or not, the Deathworlders will stand tall, and we will protect those who cannot protect themselves." The hologram flickered out, and the transmission ended. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their decision. "Do you think they'll leave us alone?" Kayla asked quietly. Jarek exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the distant stars. "They'll try to manipulate us, to use us, but they'll never control us. We are Deathworlders, Kayla, and as long as we stand together, no one can break us." Kayla nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "Then we leave. We go back to our people. And if they need us again, we'll answer on our terms." The two of them stood in silence for a long moment, looking out at the galaxy, knowing the road ahead would be difficult, uncertain, and dangerous. But they were ready. The Deathworlders had proven their strength, their honor, and their loyalty, first and foremost to themselves. And that was all that mattered. As the stars twinkled above them, Jarek turned toward Kayla, his eyes full of determination. "The battle may be over," he said, "but our journey is just beginning."